Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. It is August, which means we are in the slow season of the National Hockey League calendar, but the Penguins yesterday threw out a couple life rafts to us, multiple trades on Tuesday by Kyle Dubas and the Penguins organization. We'll dive into both of them. One of them, an exchanging of draft picks with the St. Louis Blues, and another one brings in a player that you might see in Pittsburgh this year. And let's start with that one because it's the one that for the players and for the fans that are more interested in what they're going to see this fall, this winter, and hopefully long into next spring is what player did the Penguins get back in return in these trades? And that's Cody Glass. Cody Glass is an interesting player. The Penguins bring him over from the Nashville Predators with a 2025 third-round pick as well as a 2026 sixth-round pick in exchange for 23-year-old forward prospect Jordan Frasca. Now, on the surface, this one is cut and dry, plain and simple, exactly what Kyle Dubas has been saying he's been trying to do all summer long. We saw it with the Kevin Hayes trade on the weekend of the NHL draft, and we see it again here, trying to take advantage of teams who need to eliminate cap space in order to be able to maneuver. And that's what the Penguins were able to do with the Nashville Predators, who did not want Cody Glass's $2.5 million salary cap space on their books for this year. In exchange, the Penguins decide that they will take that, as well as a third and a sixth-round pick in exchange for Jordan Frasca, who's a name that has been in the Penguins organization for the past couple of years. He was between the ECHL and the AHL last year. And let's face it, this is a player that might have made it to the National Hockey League at some point. But at the end of the day, he wasn't much of a needle mover. We wish him all the best as he heads down to the Nashville Predators organization. But the Penguins get 2 draft picks, as well as Cody Glass, a player who is going to play probably a good bit of games for the Penguins at the NHL level this season. So, and I said this yesterday on Twitter, even if Cody Glass doesn't play a singular regular season game for the Penguins, this is a successful trade for Kyle Dubas in my eyes. You get draft capital for a team that is currently starting the rebuilding process, and we'll talk about where their picks stand after the Blues trade. But you get those picks, you get a 25-year-old guy that could pan out. Maybe a change of scenery turns him into what he was projected to be when he was a first-round pick of the Vegas Golden Knights back in 2017. And in exchange, all you're paying is kind of a middle to lower tier prospect in Jordan Frasca. So let's talk about Cody Glass specifically here for a couple of minutes. 25 years old, like I mentioned. He was the first ever draft pick of the Vegas Golden Knights, which seems to be the headline for everybody talking about this trade. When I look at his potential as of now, because when he came into the league, he was coming off of a couple really solid seasons in junior, and he was believed to be a no doubt top 6 forward, top 6 center prospect. His career hasn't really panned out that way over the past couple of seasons. He was involved in that 3-team trade that sent him to the Nashville Predators. He didn't find his footing with Nashville, and now he's in his third organization in the National Hockey League. What I see him is as currently a bottom 6 AHL tweener with middle 6 potential. I would say that he's probably not a guy that you can count on to in the future become a top 6 center, but he has the potential to turn into a third line center for the Penguins down the line if he can find his footing and if he can recapture some of that promise that he had earlier in his career. You look at what he did last season with the Nashville Predators. 6 goals, 13 points in 46 games played. Not the greatest showing. Kind of reminds me of the stat line we saw from Valtteri Pustin last season, which was, I believe, 5 goals, 20 points in 56 games played. So eerily similar, but one was a 6th overall pick and one was a 7th round pick. Also, one's a center and one's a right winger, which we'll get into here in just a second. But the one problem I have with that stat line that not a lot of people have dug into is 3 of those 6 goals came in one game. Cody Glass had his first career NHL hat trick against the Colorado Avalanche, and that is half of his goal production from last year with the Nashville Predators. So it's a young player that I don't mind taking a flyer on. I don't mind giving more opportunity to, but that begs the next question. How much opportunity is Cody Glass actually going to get? Because he's another center. You look at the Penguins, what is the one thing they have in spades? What is the one thing they've always had in spades? Center options. And to this year is going to be no different. You look at the Penguins right now, I count personally 7 centers in and around the National Hockey League level. You obviously have Sidney Crosby. You obviously have Evgeny Malkin, as well as the 2 other centers that were on the roster last year, in Lars Eller, who was the third-line center all season, and Noel Acciari, who was the fourth-line center when healthy. You also brought in Kevin Hayes. You also brought in Blake Lizotte, who I've talked about as being that fourth-line left wing, despite the fact that the majority of his playing career has been spent at center at the National Hockey League level. And now you have Cody Glass, a guy who comes in at 25 years old, and you're hoping gets you towards that younger, faster, more influential bottom 6 when it comes to the scoreboard. 7 players. And that is without mentioning Sam Poulin, who you would have to imagine is in a do-or-die season of his own this upcoming year. Vasily Ponomarev, who was brought in during the Jake Gensel trade to be a bottom 6 center for this team into the future. So now you're up to 9. There's another shoe that has to drop here. Somebody, anybody of these names, outside of probably Crosby, probably Malkin, probably Hayes and Lizotte and Glass, because they just got acquired. One of those other names, Lars Eller, Noel Acciari, maybe a Sam Poulin, feels like they have to be traded at some point or other. You go into this season fostering competitive edge, fostering competition in training camp, and I know that is one thing that Kyle Dubas made sure that he was very open about last year during his first training camp as Penguins president of hockey operations and general manager. He said, we have a lot of competition, and that's going to create better performances, and that's going to make us better at the end of the day. That's what he was touting all year last year. Well, you're certainly going to have that at center when you have 9 guys vying for 4 spots. And yes, we all agree that it's probably best and better off that Noel Acciari bumps over the wing. And we all agree that Blake Lizotte, despite the fact that he doesn't have much experience there, is likely a guy that can play on the 4th line on the left wing. It's an adjustment for him, but he could probably do it. Cody Glass, we'll have to wait and see. But these are a lot of guys that you expected to see NHL ice time this year. And you quite frankly don't have the roster spot for all of them. Now you're hoping that you don't run into the injury bug, and we all know the Penguins have an extensive history with running into that injury bug, and if they do, boy, it would be nice to have 9 options for 4 spots. But at the end of the day, they're not going to run 9 options. It feels like one of them have to be moved, and if it's going to be one of them, the 2 names I'm looking at are Lars Eller, specifically Lars Eller, and then potentially Noel Acciari. It feels like Lars Eller is the easy one here, going into a contract year, a Stanley Cup champion, a bona fide third-line center that has very strong two-way capabilities, and somebody that you could get more draft capital for. And as we'll talk about with the St. Louis Blues trade that he executed before pulling off this trade with Nashville, draft capital is certainly high on Kyle Dubas' big board of things he wants to continue to bring into the organization. The one that's going to fetch the most of this center crop that is actually going to be a realistic trade option is Lars Eller. His value is higher than Acciari's. His value is higher than Kevin Hayes, higher than, probably higher than a Blake Lizotte at this point in his career, and higher than a Cody Glass. So if there's going to be a trade, I still have my eyes on Lars Eller. Do I want it to happen? As somebody who's going to watch 82 games this season, I'd like to see Lars Eller be part of that team, because I liked seeing what he did last year for the Penguins. I thought he was a very good piece. And honestly, I think he was the best third-line center and the most consistent third-line center that the Penguins have had since the first time Nick Bonino was around with the Penguins. Not the second time, obviously. But Eller filled that role in a very, very good manner. So I wouldn't mind seeing him back on the team, but based on where the team is currently at, which is, whether they want to admit it or not, kicking off a rebuild, trading Lars Eller seems like the most logical option for them from this standpoint, because that opens up opportunities for maybe a Cody Glass, that opens up more opportunities for maybe a Sam Poulin or maybe a Vasily Ponomarev, or who knows, maybe a Braden Yeager in the first 10 games of the season or more. He seems like he's a little further off from there, but again, not ruling anything out when it comes to a team that could potentially be rebuilding this year and hoping that they extend past their expectations in the year of the 2024-25 season. But it feels like with this addition of another center, even though it seems like the primary focus was bringing in a younger player, regardless of his position, along with some solid draft capital, it feels like it just makes a crowded room even more crowded. So it feels like another shoe has to drop on the Penguins roster, and it feels like that has to be a trade of a center. Again, looking at Eller, looking at Achari. Achari has 2 years left on his contract, so maybe his market isn't going to be as fruitful as that of Lars Eller, but it comes down to what the market's going to give you, and it comes down to whoever Kyle Dubas can get a good deal for. Doesn't mean that's going to happen, just means that it feels like that might be the next move for the Pittsburgh Penguins in my eyes. The other move that they made yesterday, the first move that was going to be the only topic here. It's been very quiet, obviously, in August. Everybody talking about the speculation of Crosby. I'm sure we'll get that in the questions here from everybody in the chat, which shout out to everybody who is live with us at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. Before we get into that and all of your questions, the Penguins swapped some picks with the St. Louis Blues. It seems like Kyle Dubas and the Blues, they've been doing a lot of business together this offseason. Everybody remembers Penguins got Kevin Hayes and a second-round pick at the NHL draft in exchange for future considerations. Maybe this was the consideration that when the St. Louis Blues wanted to offer sheet a couple of Edmonton Oilers, that they would get their pick back for other pick swaps in the future. The Pittsburgh Penguins traded their 2025 second-round pick, which was initially acquired in the Kevin Hayes trade, as well as a 2026 fifth-round pick in exchange for a 2026 second-rounder and a 2025 third-round pick. So they give back the pick that they got from the Blues in exchange for a 2026 second-rounder, and then they swap a fifth and a third-rounder to give the Penguins some extra capital at the top half of the draft next season. It's an interesting trade. When I saw it, I said, all right, well, Kyle Dubas is still stockpiling his draft picks because that's all this was. And then, of course, the news comes down that the St. Louis Blues offer sheeted both Philip Broberg and I believe Dylan Holloway, if I'm not mistaken. And now it makes sense because they need the draft picks that the Penguins sent back in order to pay off the Oilers if, in fact, those offer sheets go through. So that's why the trade happened. It's Kyle Dubas taking advantage of another situation as a team that wants to acquire draft capital. So you look at what the Penguins now have. 9 picks in 2025 with 1 first rounder, 0 second rounders, but 3 third round picks. They also have 9 picks now in the 2026 NHL draft, 1 first rounder, 2 second rounders, and 2 third round picks. If they go into those drafts and end up selecting 9 players, that will be the most players drafted by the Penguins organization since 2012, when they took Derek Pouliot and Olli Maatta in the first round. That was the same draft that they traded to acquire Brian Dumoulin from the Carolina Hurricanes. So a memorable draft for the Penguins in 2020 or 2012 could be coming down the pike for 2025 and 2026, and the Penguins can only hope to get similar results from at least one of their first round picks, because we all know how Pouliot turned out, but Olli Maatta still a pretty good NHLer at this stage, and obviously the trade for Brian Dumoulin worked out tenfold. But you look at those stockpilings of picks, and you look at what the Penguins are at. The one question mark is, well, they don't have a second rounder in this upcoming draft now. They traded to get one in. They traded it away again to get one in 2026. What I'll say there is, look at where the Penguins are at on their roster. There's a lot of players that could potentially turn into second-round picks. Lars Eller being one of them. I mean, that's a high price to pay, but if you get in a situation where a team is desperate for a middle six center with Stanley Cup playoff experience, Lars Eller could be that guy. If Matt Grzelcyk turns his career around in the first half of the season with the Penguins, and all of a sudden somebody needs a left shot defenseman, Maybe not a second rounder, but you could add a third rounder potentially based on where the market is at. The Penguins have multiple opportunities to get back into the second round next year and potentially have double-digit draft picks going into the 2025 draft. So as far as Kyle Dubas's stated goal of getting more draft capital, he's hit it out of the park on that one. Now, again, you have to transition this into solid selections, which also has to transition to good development, which has to transition into a good NHL player. So there's multiple steps in this, but the first step is making sure you have the draft capital to begin with, and Kyle Dubas has done that. Arguably, that's the easiest part, but at the very least, we know he's done that correctly. I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, answering all of your questions to everybody that is tuned in live with us at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. We'll be right back right after this break. Welcome back to Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. We just broke down the two trades that happened yesterday. Obviously, the Penguins acquiring Cody Glass of the Nashville Predators, as well as a pick swap with the St. Louis Blues. Glass is a player that honestly I'm excited to see. I think that going into training camp, I would pencil him in as probably a top line center or a top six center for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, a team that is going to be very intriguing early in this season. But I give him an opportunity to fight for one of those roster spots. I put him in those competitions with guys like Kevin Hayes, with guys like Lars Eller. And if there is a trade to be had, like I mentioned earlier, he just moves up the rung and moves up the ladder that much more. So I'm interested to see what he looks like in his first training camp in Pittsburgh. And if he goes down to Wilkes-Barre, who does he play with? Does he play with Ville Koivunen? Does he play with Sam Poulin? Does Sam Poulin center lines, or does Sam Poulin move back to wing where he was initially drafted as? I think there's a lot of good storylines surrounding those bubble roster players for the Penguins organization going into training camp. And of course, with camp coming in probably about a month, there's going to be plenty to talk about as players start getting back into Pittsburgh. I actually saw Penguins posted today, Alex Nedeljkovic already back in Pittsburgh. I don't know if he came back early to get some training in. I don't know if he's here for the season already, just trying to get a jump on things, but nice to see Ned back after getting that 2-year extension earlier this offseason. Let's go to the questions in the comment section here. And first, let's answer Austin's question saying point projections for bottom 6 forwards this year. That's a hard one. You look at last year, the Penguins' top scoring bottom 6 player, as I try to pull this up here from Hockey Reference, I believe it was around 30 points from Lars Eller. if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, Valtteri Puustinen to me was the most entertaining of the bottom six forwards last year. That with saying Drew O'Connor was a top six guy, but the leading bottom six scorer that was a true bottom six player the whole season was Lars Eller with around 30 points. When I look at the bottom six this year, I believe that it's going to produce more offensively. I think Kevin Hayes as a facilitator on the third line is going to open things up for Valtteri Puustinen. And with that, I have high expectations for Puustinen this season. I think he leads the Penguins bottom six in scoring if he plays the entire year down in the bottom six. And I have him and Hayes topping out at around 42 to 45 points this upcoming season. So that's the projections I'll give you on those guys. I don't have projections for every one of them because that's going to be a hard task, especially knowing that there is going to be a lot of competition in training camp to see who comes away with those bottom six spots to start the season. Let's go to Jostesh's question because that kind of leads right into it. He asks, what do you think the Penguins bottom six looks like as of now, assuming Drew O'Connor, Sidney Crosby, Brian Rust is the first line, Michael Bunting, Evgeny Malkin, and Rickard Rakell is the second line? When I look at it, I agree with what Daily Faceoff currently has as the Penguins bottom six, which is Anthony Beauvillier, Kevin Hayes, Valtteri Puustinen as the third line, Blake Lizotte, Lars Eller, and Noel Acciari as the fourth line. I think going into camp, that is the most realistic bottom six as far as placeholders, because I think that's what you're looking at right now. You're looking at a team, and Kyle Dubas has mentioned this on several occasions, and I tend to believe him, that wants to get younger, that wants to give opportunities to younger players. In this bottom six that I have here, those opportunities are afforded to Valtteri Puustinen, who I believe earned it last year with over 50 games at the NHL level. And that opportunity goes to Blake Lizotte, who signed a multi-year contract this offseason with the Penguins. And I think those two, I would expect, unless they have a poor training camp, to be in those positions when the season starts in October. The question becomes, what do they do with Anthony Beauvillier? He signed for 1 year. They're expecting him to come in, have a resurgence, find the game that he had when he was a member of the New York Islanders, and be a solid piece up and down the lineup for the Penguins on the left side. If he comes in and proves that he can be that, maybe he becomes a roadblock for guys like Ville Koivunen, guys like Sam Poulin if he moves back over to wing. So again, there is still some movement to be had. And as I mentioned at the outset of the show, and we'll mention all the time when talking about this bottom six, specifically at the center ice position, I feel like there might also be a trade coming for one of these centers, Eller, Acciari being the two names that I mentioned earlier. But to answer your question, where do I have the bottom six as of now going into camp? Beauvillier, Hayes, Puustinen, Lizotte, Eller, and Acciari. That's my bottom six as of right now. Let's move over to Mitch's question next, saying, do you think Crosby wants to be traded and wants to see how this season plays out, or is he just waiting for no reason? I don't think it's for no reason. I also don't think there's much of a concern when it comes to his contract. I'm not overly concerned. I know everybody was looking at 1 week ago on August 7th for him to sign it and do the very Sidney Crosby-est thing that he possibly could and sign his final contract on his 37th birthday. That didn't happen. Oh well. We move on, and my next expectation, and honestly, my expectation before then, is they're just waiting for him to get back into town. Crosby's not in Pittsburgh right now, at least as far as I know. Crosby's not in Pittsburgh right now, and you're not going to sign Sidney Crosby via e-sign and e-signature when he's up in Nova Scotia or he's traveling around Europe, which he did earlier this summer. I think he signs it whenever he shows up for training camp, and I think that the reason being the Penguins need a little bit more juice going into this season than they did in the past. A lot of people expect the Penguins to have a down season. A lot of people expect them to, for the third straight year, be a non-playoff team in the 2024-25 year. This is a gate-driven league. You need to pull as many marketing stunts as humanly possible to sell tickets. And the longer this goes where he doesn't have a contract, the more questionable the ticket sales are going to become, and the more questionable it's going to become from the Penguins' business standpoint. The fact is, Crosby has always stated that he wants to finish his career a Penguin. I understand that they're heading in the wrong direction, but he knew that when he said multiple times that he wants to finish his career as a member of the Penguins. He wants to be a one sweater guy. He knew that eventually things would go sour. He knew that every team eventually falls off. They had an unprecedented run. Him, Malkin, and Chris Letang of going to the playoffs 16 or 17, I can't remember at this point, straight seasons. They are also the longest tenured Big Three in North American sports history. You knew eventually, if that is the path you're going to take, there's going to be drop off at some point, and that's probably going to be because your team gets a little bit too old and the moves aren't made correctly to supplement them. That's what's happened over the last couple of seasons. I expect Crosby to sign, and I think it's going to be whenever he gets back into town for training camp, and that's going to be a big marketing spectacle. You're going to have him sitting down as a press conference. He's going to sign. It's going to be the declaration that he becomes a Penguin for life, because to me, that's been the only option to this point. I haven't really wavered on that fact. I don't see him wanting to be out. I don't see him wanting to be traded. The guy still has the capability to carry a team. I think he's going to say, I can carry this team further than everybody expects him to be carried. And I expect him to do that as we hit 87 live viewers right now on the live stream. Perfect timing. Let's see if there's any other questions here. Dapton says, what's your take on this proposed trade letting from Letang to Montreal? I haven't seen it. I saw that there was somebody that did a YouTube video on it. Chris Letang has a full no trade clause as of right now. Chris Letang is also going to stay in Pittsburgh as long as Crosby is in Pittsburgh and as long as Malkin's in Pittsburgh. Now, if this Crosby thing takes an unforeseen turn and he ends up going wherever else, and that is a major if in my eyes, maybe Chris Letang says, I want to go play for my hometown, my childhood team, the Montreal Canadiens, with the general manager being his former agent. Sure. But as of right now, I don't think there's any credence to Chris Letang wanting to be traded to Montreal, and I don't think there's any credence to the Penguins desiring to trade Chris Letang to Montreal, at least as of this point in time. Alex Rowan asks, is this it for moves, or do you think we will see someone like Achari or Eller get moved for draft capital? That's exactly what I see happening. I do think that one of those two, if there's a trade to be had, because there has to be a dance partner on the other side, I feel like one of those two could potentially be on the move before the season starts in exchange for draft capital. And even if the season starts, I could see that trade coming down the pike as current needs change once the season starts and once injuries starting to occur around the league. I feel like that trade, specifically the Lars Eller trade, happens at some point in some way, shape, or form this next season. Let's go answer a couple more questions. Alex Rowan says, I know he isn't signed yet, but would there be a fit for Kyler Yamamoto on the Penguins? It seems like they're pretty full up of bottom six bodies right now, right? We talked about center, 9 guys at center, 7 of them bottom 6 centers right now. And that's even taken out Braden Yeager, who some people are holding out hope for. They're full up at centers. And then you look at wing and you also say, all right, well, Tristan Brose, not expected to be an NHLer this season, but stranger things have happened. Players have been able to turn pro and just absolutely light the world on fire. He's going to be at the AHL level this season. You also have Ponomarev, who can move to wing. You also have Koivunen in there as well. There's a lot of options for the Penguins right now in the bottom 6. You bring in a guy like Kyler Yamamoto. To me, that would kind of smell of Vinny Hinostroza from last year. It would smell of Radim Zahorna of last year, of give them an opportunity. If they outperform somebody else, then sure, they can have a roster spot. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to outperform other people. So giving them a flyer, maybe a PTO in training camp, wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. I agree with that, Alex. Mitch asks a follow-up for the Sidney Crosby discussion. If Crosby does sign, how long of an extension will it be? A lot of people, Elliot Friedman of Sportsnet, as well as the dynamic duo over at The Athletic, Josh Yohe and Rob Rossi, have speculated upon 3 years. More so, Friedman at Sportsnet has speculated on 3 years. It's kind of been alluded to a couple times by Yohe and Rossi alike. I would tend to agree with that. 3 years gets him up to, I believe, 40 or 41 years old. And that effectively gets him through the end of his career to where he's not going to have to sign another contract. He's not going to have to go through what he's going through right now. I don't think he's going through very much. I think he's probably enjoying his summer. But then he can take it year by year. Because he said at the end of last year, in his post postseason media scrum. He said, I'm at the point in my career, 37 years old, or going to be 37 years old, where I'm going to evaluate at the end of every year. Well, at the end of last year, he was a 94-point player that probably could have been up over 100 points had it been for a slew of factors. Had they been better in the season and kept Jake Gensel, he would have been over 100 points. If the power play was 25th in the league instead of 30th all season, he would have been over 100 points. So last year, he was still an elite player, probably top 5 players in the National Hockey League when all things are considered once again. But he said he's going to take it year by year and see how he feels, because as you get older, these 82-game seasons get harder. I think a 3-year deal gives him that opportunity where he's not going to potentially tie up the Penguins for long term, but at the same time, he can evaluate year after year without worrying about, all right, what other contract extension, what other contract talks do I have to have with this speculation, which I don't think he cares. I don't think he might not even know it. He might not even see it, because this is a guy that is more unplugged than seemingly everybody else in the National Hockey League. He might not see it, but I'm sure it's something that when he gets asked those questions, if he shows up to camp and doesn't sign immediately, he's going to be wishing that he didn't have to answer those types of questions. He's a guy that likes to focus singularly on the game and his game and the Penguins game, and not on the extracurriculars. Jean-Claude Von Don says, will the parade start at PPG and end at the Point? I don't know what parade you're talking about. I'm not going to say they're a Stanley Cup champion in the foreseeable future. I hope I'm wrong, because covering a Stanley Cup run would be extremely fun. If they do, I believe they've always started at PPG, and a couple of them have ended at the Point. One of them, I believe in 2016, ended at, was it Stanwyck Street? They set up the stage. 2017, it went all the way down to the Point, because there's that famed picture of both Murray and Fleury holding up the cup before Fleury was eventually taken in the expansion draft. It's a perfect route, right? You start at PPG, make your way down Boulevard of the Allies, go on to the Point. I will say some of my favorite memories from college, which I was college age when they won in 16 and 17. My favorite memories from college were those two parades. Specifically, the 2017 one was a lot of fun. Let's go for a couple other questions here. Let's go to Evans, who says, what's the likelihood of Puustinen making the opening night roster? Also, do you think there's a chance Achari gets traded? I think Puustinen is leader in the clubhouse for third line right wing right now. And if he comes in and he performs as such in training camp, he makes the opening night roster. He played 52 games last year. I mean, a lot of people forget that because they look at him and say, oh, he was up, he was down, he was on the NHL roster, he was sent down before the All-Star break, and then it took a little bit longer to get him back up. I think that he's a guy that they're looking at as he should be an everyday NHLer this year. If he comes in, does the right things, and starts hot, he makes the opening night roster. So, Evan, I would say yes. If I had to make a prediction, I'm saying he does make the opening night roster. I think he has a spot as of right now. It's his to lose. As far as Achari getting traded, again, I think it's more likely that you see Lars Eller get traded. He's the better of the two players. He has the easier to move contract of the two. But Achari's a player that around playoff time, teams like to have, man. Fourth liner, block shots like it doesn't phase him, which obviously it does. It caused him several injuries last year, but he's an absolute warrior. He'll go and block those shots anyway because he knows that's his level. His offense didn't shine through last year, but he does have an offensive touch, specifically when he's able to play on the wing, which is why I'm interested to see if Eller does get moved, if they bring up one of those younger guys and put them at center and leave Achari at the wing. I'm hoping that's what they end up doing, because then he can kind of showcase that offense a little bit more, because he really didn't last year. And even Kyle Dubas said it. Everybody gets on him for his offense. It's not what he's brought in to do. It's nice and a nice bonus when he can do it, but it's not his main objective for Noel Acciari. Noel Acciari is a defense first, block shots, lay the body. That's what he's done for the Penguins. He did it last year for the Penguins. You're hoping that he does it again this year. And if he gets that, that market up enough, I could potentially see him being traded, because again, this is a team that right now is in a rebuilding phase. Pittsburgh Heather says, I don't get the bottom six signing overall, i.e. a guy like Emil Bemstrom, Anthony Beauvillier. Why not Gruden, Poulin, Puljujarvi, etc.? That's one name that I haven't mentioned, is Puljujarvi. I really liked what he did last year in his limited opportunities. And again, he was coming off of double hip fusion surgery. He had to get up to speed. He was slow played by the coaching staff. His first game was, I believe, 4 minutes of ice time at the National Hockey League level, and that was after a couple of weeks of American Hockey League play. So I do like Puljujarvi. I understand where they're coming from, Heather, on these bottom six signings. I wasn't big on bringing back Emil Bemstrom, but sure, give him an opportunity. If he outperforms a guy like Beauvillier, a guy like Lizotte, he's going to get playing time. I think that's why they're bringing in guys like this, guys that are low risk, don't have to sign them for very long. I believe Beauvillier and Bemstrom both signed on a 1-year deal, and let them compete. Whoever's the best is going to get the playing time. Whoever's not, you can move on from them. It's low risk. So I think they're just trying to put as many opportunities and as many, honestly, wild cards on this roster as possible. So hopefully one or two of them work out and they have a better bottom six than they did last year. Because last year they did a similar thing with their bottom six and it didn't work out. Zohorna was great in training camp, not so great once the regular season started, and now he's playing overseas. Same thing happened with Vinny Hinostroza. He was fine, but he wasn't as good as they were hoping he would be. So they replaced him with somebody like Puustinen, who was playing better at the end of the season and was getting those reps and getting those opportunities instead. Mitch says, do you think the Penguins have a solid chance of a wild card spot this year? I'd say they have a chance. I think they go into the season as a bubble team. There's a bunch of teams that are in and around there. And it's hard to really make that assumption or make that declaration on August 14th, right? We don't know what a lot of the offseason moves have done for certain teams. We don't know what the Devils will look like. I think they're going to be another team in contention for the playoffs this year. After taking a step back last year, I think you look at a team like the Buffalo Sabres that could potentially take a jump this year. A team like the Red Wings that once again are going to be back there and maybe better than they were last year. It's going to be harder to jump them. It's going to be hard for them to make the playoffs, the Pittsburgh Penguins, but I do give them a chance because I'm never going to count out Crosby and Malkin and Letang and honestly, Erik Karlsson as well. Brian Rust can be thrown in there as well. And I do think when you look at the team on paper in the Penguins, they have an opportunity that if everything goes right, they have an opportunity to be in the upper half of the Eastern Conference. And that might be just enough to get them into the playoffs. Pittsburgh Heather says, where's the net front presence that they haven't had since they traded Horny? His name is Michael Bunting, and it's not going to look the same. It's not going to be as pesky. It's not going to be as effective, I think, as Patrick Hornqvist, because I think he was very underrated, what he was able to do, especially you look on the power play, what he was able to do as a net front presence. 10 goals his second season in Pittsburgh, 9 goals his first, and I believe 15 his third. That's ridiculous for a guy that's on that power play, not named Crosby, Malkin, Letang at the time. I think you see it from Michael Bunting. And I also think you start to see it a little bit from Drew O'Connor. O'Connor last year was better than any of us could have expected. And I think he builds on that this year. And one of the things he said late last season after the year ended was, the one thing I want to add to my game is the ability to be in that net front area and take advantage of opportunities in that net front. So if he's able to do that, I give O'Connor and I give Bunting those nods as net front presences. Maybe not Patrick Hornqvist type, but certainly more than we've seen since Hornqvist was traded back in 2020. Evan says, are there any other players that the Penguins already have or have obtained that have a similar playing style to Bunting? It's clear we need more like him. One player that's like that, you're not going to see him this year. You're probably not going to see him next year, but he was acquired this offseason. In fact, he was drafted this offseason. Tanner Howe. Tanner Howe is kind of a carbon copy of Michael Bunting, like in a lot of ways. Not maybe carbon copy was a little too far. Very similar characteristics, though. And I think Tanner Howe is a guy that is going to ingratiate himself to the Penguins fan base because of that fact. And he also has a high offensive ceiling as of right now. If he can get into the NHL, could potentially be another Michael Bunting-esque player. Jagger Joshua, I got to double check if he's still with the Penguins organization, but a lot of people liked him because he brings similar aspects, just not high offensive upside there. Mitch says, do you think we see a Crosby fight this season? Yes. Yes, I do, because I think the Penguins are going to struggle this season again. And I think Crosby is going to get fed up at some point. And I think because of that, he drops the mitts. It doesn't happen often, but I mean, the guy is undeniable when he does it. He's hard to beat in fights. I'm going to say, yes, we do see Crosby drop the gloves at some point this season. Let's go down to Mark's question. That is, do you think Dubas will trade for Cody Ceci similar to what he did with Nashville to pick up picks? I think even though, the Penguins were pretty stocked up on centers before they made the Cody Glass trade, I think the Penguins are pretty stocked up on defense as well. Cody Ceci plays the right side, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look that up real quick. Handedness is a weird word to spell. But Cody Ceci is a right shot defenseman, correct? Because he played alongside Jack Johnson when he was here. The Penguins have about $1 million in cap space right now. Don't see them adding Cody Ceci on the right side, especially because if you're going to add a cap piece like that, you're not going to add it to a side that's already very expensive. Chris Letang, $6.1 million. Erik Karlsson, $10 million. And honestly, I don't want to take any opportunity away from Jack St. Ivany. I think the Penguins want to see what they have in this kid, and they want to give him a really good opportunity this year to really establish himself at the NHL level. So I don't see the Penguins going after Cody Ceci. Michael Thompson asks, we need Rax to have a better year, ? Yes, you do. Rickard Rakell last year, for one reason or other, had a lot of issues, right? First 14 to 17 games of the season, no goals, 4 assists. Couldn't really find his footing, gets injured. How much of the injury played into his struggles in the first half of the season, that much we'll never know. But rough start, injured for an extended period of time, comes back, looks good, fades away, looks good again, fades away. And then at the end of the season, seemed like he found a home on that line with Evgeny Malkin and Michael Bunting, the best that we've seen him look with Evgeny Malkin since coming over from Anaheim a couple of years ago. Undoubtedly, if the Penguins are going to be successful this year, they need their top 6 to be clicking on all cylinders. And Rickard Rakell is one of, if not the biggest question marks for them, because I know what Brian Rust is. To be completely honest, I have a pretty good idea what Michael Bunting is. Drew O'Connor is still kind of a question mark, but Rickard Rakell is a guy that scored 11 power play goals 2 seasons ago, was a 28 goal scorer 2 seasons ago, and then faded into oblivion last year and was being tossed around with Riley Smith as they tried to get one of them going, and they only got going every once in a while. So they 100% need Rickard Rakell to be good this year. Pittsburgh Heather says, the Robertson trade rumors died quickly. Any chance that could still happen? I'd like to see it happen. I think Robertson fits the mold of exactly what the Penguins need right now. But I do think that it's going to get a little bit more difficult to happen in August. In September, if Robertson holds his own and says, I still want traded, I still want a fresh start, I think the Penguins would have interest there. And I understand. Right now, they have about $1 million in cap space. Likely that Robertson's contract would come in at a little bit more than that. They could send somebody down. They can create that cap space for Nick Robertson. And honestly, I like Glass. I like Blake Lizotte. Bringing in Nick Robertson is bringing in the highest potential you've brought in all offseason. I have to try to think really quickly of every move in case I forgot somebody, but I feel like that would be probably the highest upside and the best player that they would have brought in all offseason long. Tyler asks, as we're only going to answer a couple more here, I got to jump. He says, do you think Wilkes-Barre Pens, as they're shaping up, could be one of the top teams? I think so, but what's your opinion? I agree. I don't know much about Kirk McDonald, who's the new head coach there, but I do know one thing for sure. They're going to have some of the best goaltending in the American Hockey League. Point blank. Joe Blomqvist was one of the best last year. Sergei Murashov, if that's where he plays, he's dynamite. Now, he has to obviously make that change and make that switch to North American ice, but they will have one of the best goaltending combinations in the American Hockey League this year. And then add on the fact that they have guys like Tristan Brose, who's looking to prove himself in his first professional season. Guys like Owen Pickering, who's looking to prove himself in his first professional season. Ville Koivunen coming over after having a great year in Europe last year. I think the Penguins, they got a lot of young talent there. I think they could be one of the top teams. Again, they're in a tough division. Anytime you're in the same division as the back-to-back champions of the Calder Cup and the Hershey Bears, it's going to be tough, especially in the AHL when you play your division so much more. But I do think that they're going to have a really good season, and I think it'll be very entertaining to keep up with the Pens of Northeastern Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh Heather says, is Shea or Ludwig the 7th D? Going into camp, I'm going to give the nod to Shea because Ludwig, his timetable after the surgery was that he's just be getting back to full strength right around when training camp starts or midway through training camp. So I'll give the nod to Shea, but I do think that right now it's the flip of a coin because they provide totally different things. Ryan Shea is that defense first, just try to be steady type of defenseman, whereas John Ludwig is, well, change the game with a big hit, change the game with a big fight type of player. I like Ludwig. I think if he can round his defense into form a little bit more, I think he could be a really good seventh defenseman, potentially sixth defenseman in the future for the Penguins if they can actually clear up that left side and figure some things out. Let's see if there's any other questions before we go. Dabton says, what would the Pens want back for Eller and or Achari? Draft picks. That's what they've wanted all offseason. That's why they have 9 in the next 3 drafts. They would want draft picks and probably preferably somewhere between the 3rd and 4th round for guys like Achari and Eller. And if a team's desperate, it'd be great to get back into the 2nd round list next year. I'm not sure whether or not that happens. And we'll close it off with this one. Michael Thompson asks, can we see Braden Yeager on the ice this year? Definitely somewhere. I think it's more likely that you see Braden Yeager with the Moose Jaw Warriors. I would say if I had to put a percentage on it, and it's, again, August 14th, we have to see how he comes in and performs the Prospects Challenge, which he's going to be in, at training camp, which he's going to be in for the 2nd straight year, and preseason games, which he's going to perform in for the 2nd straight year. The percentage chance that we see Braden Yeager get that opportunity in Pittsburgh this year, I'm going to put it like 15%. And even that 15% is probably the, hey, let's give him the first 9 games and then slide his contract back to the WHL. He's really good. He's really exciting. And obviously he is clear-cut the Penguins' best prospect that they have had in not just years, but probably in the last decade. But I do think that they're going to be careful with him because of that. And I think part of that is not rushing his progression and knowing that for a team that is not right now close to being a contender, you don't need to rush your best prospect, a prospect that you desperately need to be really able to hit as soon as he makes it to the NHL, which I think is more likely to happen next season in 2025-26. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, but that is going to be it for this episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. We'll try to make sure we're back on Wednesdays every Wednesday going forward, and the time is going to change. So just turn on the notifications on YouTube and you'll get the opportunity to get notified when we go live and then come in and join the chat, join the conversation like everybody did here today. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.